In the opulent halls of Ashford Manor, a priceless locket vanishes, harboring a scandalous family secret that could shatter reputations. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, untangles a web of lies spun by desperate heir Charles Ashford, cunning heiress Clara Duval, and a loyal governess hiding her own fears. As alibis crumble and a staged break-in unravels, Poirot's pursuit of truth exposes betrayal, debt, and a hidden letter, gripping you in a whirlwind of deception where loyalty is the ultimate price. Chapter 2. The gathering of suspects. The grand dining hall of Ashford Manor gleamed with the opulence of centuries past, its long oak table polished to a mirror-like sheen and set with silver cutlery that caught the light of the chandeliers overhead. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting pastoral scenes, their colors softened by time, and a massive fireplace roared at one end, casting a warm glow across the room. The air carried the faint scent of beeswax and the richer aroma of the meal being prepared. Roast pheasant, Poirot noted, with a hint of rosemary. Hercule Poirot stood just inside the doorway, his small, precise frame almost lost in the grandeur of the space, yet his presence commanded attention. His sharp green eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. The slight chip on the edge of a crystal goblet, the faint crease in the tablecloth where it had been hastily smoothed, the way the firelight danced on the faces of the servants as they moved with practiced efficiency. Lord Reginald Ashford had insisted on a formal luncheon to welcome his guests, and Poirot had arrived early, as was his custom, to observe the arrivals. He wore his finest gray suit, the lapels crisp, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the damp journey from London. His mustache, meticulously groomed, curved with a symmetry that spoke of his devotion to order. He stood with his hands clasped, behind his back, his head tilted slightly as if listening to the room itself. To Poirot, every space had a voice, and Ashford Manor was already whispering secrets. The first to enter was Lord Ashford himself, his silver hair catching the light as he crossed the room to greet Poirot. His face, though handsome and distinguished, bore the weight of worry, his smile a touch too forced. "Poirot, you're early, as always," he said, his voice warm but strained. "I trust your room is to your liking?" "It is most satisfactory, mon ami," Poirot replied, his Belgian accent lending a musical quality to his words. "The view of the gardens, it is charming, even in this mist. But tell me, who are these guests I am to meet?" Ashford's eyes flickered toward the door as if expecting an interruption. "A small party, but complicated. My wife, Lady Beatrice, of course. My son Charles, who's been away in London too long. Then there's Clara Duval, an heiress with a sharp mind and sharper ambitions. Mr. Harrow, a businessman I've dealt with on occasion, and Miss Langley, the governess to my late sister's children. She's been with us for some months now." Poirot nodded, his mind already cataloging the names. "And the nature of this complication?" Ashford hesitated, his fingers tightening briefly on the back of a chair. "Not now, Poirot. Let us enjoy the meal first. I'd rather you form your own impressions." Before Poirot could press further, the doors swung open and Lady Beatrice Ashford entered. She was a striking woman in her late 40s, with auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon and a gown of deep emerald that accentuated her poised bearing. Her smile was gracious, but Poirot noted the slight tension in her jaw, the way her eyes darted to her husband before settling on him. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a gloved hand. "Reginald has spoken so highly of you. It's an honor to have you at Ashford Manor." "The honor, madam, is mine," Poirot replied, bowing slightly as he took her hand. His fingers lingered just long enough to feel the faint tremor in her grip, a tell perhaps of nerves or something deeper. He filed it away, his expression serene. Next came Charles Ashford, a tall young man in his early 30s with his father's silver hair but none of his composure. His tie was slightly askew, and his eyes, a pale blue, held a restless energy. He offered Poirot a curt nod, muttering, "Pleasure to meet you," before moving to the sideboard to pour himself a generous glass of brandy. Poirot's gaze lingered on the young man's hands, which trembled slightly as he lifted the glass. a sign of agitation or perhaps something more habitual. Clara Duval swept in moments later, her presence like a gust of fresh air. She was younger than Poirot had expected, perhaps 25, with golden hair pinned loosely and a dress of pale blue silk that shimmered as she moved. Her smile was confident, almost challenging, and her dark eyes met Poirot's with a directness that bordered on defiance. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice clear and melodic. "I've heard you're a man who sees everything." "I do. Hope we don't bore you this weekend." Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Mademoiselle, I find that people are rarely boring when one looks closely enough." Her laugh was light, but Poirot caught the briefest flicker of unease in her posture, as if his words had struck a nerve. Mr. Harrow followed, a stocky man in his 50s with a ruddy complexion and a suit that spoke of wealth but lacked the refinement of Ashford's tailoring. His handshake was firm, almost aggressive, and his voice boomed as he introduced himself. "Edward Harrow, sir. Pleasure to meet a man of your reputation. Ashford says you're the best at sniffing out trouble." His tone was jovial, but his eyes were calculating, lingering on Poirot a fraction too long. Poirot noted the man's polished shoes, the faint scent of cigar smoke clinging to his jacket, and the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Finally, Miss Langley entered, a slight figure in a plain gray dress that seemed designed to make her invisible. Her brown hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes, a muted hazel, remained fixed on the floor as she murmured a greeting. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, barely audible. "I'm the governess here. I hope I shan't be in your way." Her deference was almost excessive, and Poirot's keen senses picked up the slight quiver in her voice, the way her fingers twisted together as she spoke. A woman hiding something, he thought, though whether it was guilt or fear remained to be seen. With the guests assembled, the butler, Grayson, announced that luncheon was served, and they took their places at the table. Poirot sat opposite Lord Ashford, giving him a clear view of the entire party. The servants moved silently, placing plates of steaming pheasant and glazed vegetables before each guest, the clink of china and silverware the only sound for a moment. Poirot's eyes never stopped moving, noting the way Lady Beatrice's hand lingered on her husband's arm, the way Charles avoided his father's gaze, the way Clara Duval's fingers toyed with her napkin as she spoke. Small things, but to Poirot, they were the threads of a tapestry yet to be fully woven. The conversation began politely enough, with Lady Beatrice steering it toward neutral topics. The weather, the beauty of the Kent countryside, the upcoming hunt season. Poirot listened, his expression one of polite interest, but his mind was elsewhere, cataloging the undercurrents. Charles spoke little, his responses curt and distracted, and when he did speak, it was to deflect questions about his time in London. Clara, by contrast, was animated, her stories of Parisian soirees and Monte Carlo casinos delivered with a practiced charm. Yet Poirot noticed her glances toward Mr. Harrow, brief but pointed, as if gauging his reaction. Harrow himself was loud, his anecdotes about business deals in Manchester and Liverpool filled with self-aggrandizement. But there was a guardedness in his posture, a tension that suggested he was performing. Miss Langley remained nearly silent, answering only when directly addressed, and even then, her words were measured, her voice barely above a whisper. Poirot tested her with a question about the children she taught, hoping to draw her out, but her response was vague, her eyes never meeting his. "They're bright, monsieur. Very bright," she said, and then fell silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap. As the meal progressed, Lord Ashford grew increasingly restless, his fingers drumming lightly on the table, a habit Poirot had not noticed in their previous encounters. At last, as the servants cleared the plates and brought out a tray of delicate pastries, Ashford cleared his throat, drawing all eyes to him. The room fell silent, the air heavy with anticipation. "My friends," he began, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of tension. "I'm afraid I must share some troubling news. This morning I discovered that a family heirloom, a diamond-encrusted locket passed down through generations, has gone missing from the manor." A murmur rippled through the group. Lady Beatrice gasped softly, her hand flying to her throat, while Charles's face darkened, his jaw tightening. Clara Duval's eyes widened, but Poirot noted the way her lips curved slightly, as if suppressing a smile. Mr. Harrow leaned back in his chair, his expression one of exaggerated shock, and Miss Langley's hands clenched so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Missing?" Clara said, her voice light but with a hint of skepticism. "Surely it's just misplaced, Lord Ashford. Such things happen in a house this size." Ashford shook his head. "I've had the staff search every room where it might have been left. It was kept in a locked case in my study, and the lock was forced. This was no misplacement." The word forced hung in the air, and Poirot's eyes darted from face to face. Charles stared at his plate, his fingers gripping his fork too tightly. Lady Beatrice's gaze flickered to her son, then away, her lips pressed into a thin "hung." Harrow let out a low whistle, muttering something about damned thieves, while Clara's expression remained unreadable, her fingers still toying with her napkin. Miss Langley, however, was the most revealing. Her eyes darted to the door as if she longed to flee, and her breathing quickened, almost imperceptibly. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of authority. "Monseigneur Ashford, this is most distressing. Ma." Chapter 3. The First Lie. The air in Ashford Manor's dining hall hung heavy with the weight of Lord Ashford's revelation, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the polished oak table. Hercule Poirot sat poised, his small frame, a study in stillness, yet his sharp green eyes darted from face to face, cataloging every reaction to the news of the stolen diamond-encrusted locket. The clink of silverware had ceased, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the distant patter of rain against the tall windows and the occasional crackle of the fire in the massive stone hearth. The aroma of the lemon soufflé lingered, now mingling with the faint metallic tang of unease that seemed to seep from the guests. Poirot's hands rested lightly on the table, fingers steepled, his expression one of polite attentiveness, but his mind was a whirl of observation, piecing together the puzzle before him. Lord Reginald Ashford stood at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the candlelight, his face etched with a mixture of resolve and anxiety. His announcement of the locket's theft had stirred the room like a stone dropped into a still pond, and the ripples were still spreading. Lady Beatrice, seated to his right, clutched her napkin, her knuckles pale against the emerald green of her gown. Her eyes, a deep hazel, flickered toward her husband, then to her son, Charles, who sat slouched, his gaze fixed on the table as if it held the answers to his troubles. Across from him, Clara Duval, the heiress, leaned back in her chair, her golden hair shimmering as she tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips that Poirot found curiously out of place. Mr. Edward Harrow, the businessman, let out a low grunt, his ruddy face creasing in what might have been concern or irritation, while Miss Langley, the governess, sat rigid, her hands hidden beneath the table, her face a mask of quiet distress. Poirot's voice broke the silence, soft but carrying the weight of authority. "Monseigneur Ashford, this theft it is most distressing. But perhaps, if we are to uncover the truth, we might begin with the simplest of questions. Who among us was aware of the locket's value?" The question was deliberate, designed to provoke reactions rather than elicit answers. Poirot's method, honed over years of unraveling human deceit, relied on the subtle tells that betrayed a lie: a fleeting glance, a tightened jaw, a pause too long or too short. He watched now, his eyes moving from one guest to another, noting every detail with the precision of a watchmaker. Lady Beatrice was the first to respond, her voice steady but with a faint tremor. "It's no secret, Monsieur Poirot. The locket has been in the Ashford family for generations. We all knew it was priceless, not just for the diamonds but for its history." Her words were measured, but Poirot caught the way her fingers tightened on the napkin, crumpling the fine linen. Charles shifted in his seat, his pale blue eyes darting to his mother before dropping again. "Common knowledge," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Everyone here's heard Father talk about it." His tone was sullen, and Poirot noted the slight shake in his hand as he reached for his wineglass, the liquid trembling against the rim. Clara Duval's smile widened, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's with a boldness that bordered on defiance. "I'd heard of it, of course," she said, her voice light and melodic. "Lord Ashford is quite proud of his collection, but I'm afraid I'm not one for family heirlooms. I prefer my jewels to be modern." Her laugh was bright, but Poirot saw the way her fingers toyed with the stem of her glass, a restless motion that belied her casual tone. Mr. Harrow leaned forward, his broad shoulders filling the space. "Valuable, yes, but who'd be fool enough to steal it in a house full of people? Sounds like an inside job, if you ask me." His voice was loud, almost accusatory, and Poirot noted the way his eyes swept the table, lingering on Charles for a fraction too long. Miss Langley, when pressed, spoke so softly her words were nearly lost. I knew it was important, monsieur. The children mentioned it once or twice, but I never saw it." Her eyes remained fixed on her lap, and Poirot observed the rapid rise and fall of her chest, a sign of nerves that intrigued him. Poirot nodded, his expression serene, but his mind was already at work. Each response had been plausible, yet each carried a shadow of something unspoken. Lady Beatrice's protectiveness, Charles's evasiveness, Clara's calculated charm, Harrow's aggressive deflection, Miss Langley's fear, all were threads in the tapestry of deceit that Poirot was determined to unravel. "Merci," he said, his voice smooth. "It is helpful to know who was aware of this treasure. But let us consider the circumstances. The locket, it was kept in a locked case, oui? And the lock was forced. This suggests either great boldness or great desperation. Tell me, Monseigneur, who had access to your study?" Ashford's face tightened, his fingers drumming lightly on the table, a habit Poirot had noted earlier. "Only myself and Grayson, the butler, have keys. The staff have been with us for years, and I trust them implicitly. But the study is not always locked during the day. Guests, family, anyone could have entered." Poirot's eyes flickered. To Grayson, who stood by the sideboard, his posture rigid, his face impassive. The butler's presence was unobtrusive, yet Poirot sensed a watchfulness in him, as if he too were observing the room. "And you, Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, turning to him. "You saw nothing unusual last night?" Grayson's eyes met Poirot's briefly, then dropped. "No, sir. I locked the study at 10, as is my custom. Everything was in order." Poirot nodded, but his mind noted the butler's slight hesitation, the way his hands clasped together a touch too tightly. Another thread to pull, he thought. The conversation shifted, the guests attempting to regain their composure, but the air remained charged. Poirot excused himself shortly after dessert, citing a need for fresh air, but in truth he wanted to observe the manor's layout and the behavior of its inhabitants away from the formal setting of the dining hall. He slipped into the corridor, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet, and made his way to the grand staircase that led to the upper floors. The manor was a labyrinth of rooms and passages, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Ashfords, their eyes seeming to follow him as he passed. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of old wood and lavender, and Poirot's senses were alert to every detail: the creak of a floorboard, the flicker of a candle, the distant murmur of voices. He paused by a tall window overlooking the Zoo gardens where the mist had thickened, cloaking the grounds in an eerie gray veil. The faint outline of the fountain was visible, its stone cherubs glistening with moisture. Poirot's thoughts turned to the locket, a small object, yet heavy, with significance. Its theft was no random act. It was deliberate, calculated, and likely tied to the tensions he had sensed among the guests. But what was the motive? Greed, revenge, or something deeper, rooted in the secrets each carried? As he stood there, he heard footsteps behind him, soft but deliberate. He turned to see Miss Langley, her gray dress blending into the shadows, her face pale and her eyes wide with what might have been fear or guilt. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect to see you here." "Mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his tone gentle but his eyes sharp, The night. It is conducive to reflection, is it not? You seem troubled. Perhaps you wish to share something with Poirot? Her lips parted, and for a moment he thought she might speak. But then she shook her head, her hands twisting together. No, monsieur, it's nothing. I should return to my room. She turned and hurried away, her footsteps echoing faintly. In the silent hall, Poirot watched her go, his mind noting the encounter. Miss Langley, fearful, evasive, hiding something, possibly connected to the family. He opened his small leather notebook and jotted down the observation, his neat handwriting filling the page with precise, deliberate strokes. Then he continued his exploration, moving toward the study where the locket had been kept. The study was at the end of a long corridor, its heavy oak door slightly ajar. Poirot pushed it open, his eyes scanning the room. It was a masculine space, with dark wood paneling, a large desk cluttered, with papers and shelves lined with leather-bound books. A glass-fronted cabinet stood against one wall, its lock visibly damaged, the wood splintered where force had been applied. Poirot approached, his magnifying glass in hand, and examined the lock closely. The scratches were fresh. The damage. Chapter 3. The First Lie. The air in Ashford Manor's dining hall hung heavy with the weight of Lord Ashford's revelation, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the polished oak table. Hercule Poirot sat poised, his small frame, a study in stillness, yet his sharp green eyes darted from face to face, cataloging every reaction to the news of the stolen diamond-encrusted locket. The clink of silverware had ceased, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the distant patter of rain against the tall windows and the occasional crackle of the fire in the massive stone hearth. The aroma of the lemon soufflé lingered, now mingling with the faint metallic tang of unease that seemed to seep from the guests. Poirot's hands rested lightly on the table, fingers steepled, his expression one of polite attentiveness, but his mind was a whirl of observation, piecing together the puzzle before him. Lord Reginald Ashford stood at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the candlelight, his face etched with a mixture of resolve and anxiety. His announcement of the locket's theft had stirred the room like a stone dropped into a still pond, and the ripples were still spreading. Lady Beatrice, seated to his right, clutched her napkin, her knuckles pale against the emerald green of her gown. Her eyes, a deep hazel, flickered toward her husband, then to her son, Charles, who sat slouched, his gaze fixed on the table as if it held the answers to his troubles. Across from him, Clara Duval, the heiress, leaned back in her chair, her golden hair shimmering as she tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips that Poirot found curiously out of place. Mr. Edward Harrow, the businessman, let out a low grunt, his ruddy face creasing in what might have been concern or irritation, while Miss Langley, the governess, sat rigid, her hands hidden beneath the table, her face a mask of quiet distress. Poirot's voice broke the silence, soft but carrying the weight of authority. Monseigneur Ashford, this theft, it is most distressing. But perhaps, if we are to uncover the truth, we might begin with the simplest of questions. Who among us was aware of the locket's value? The question was deliberate, designed to provoke reactions rather than elicit answers. Poirot's method, honed over years of unraveling human deceit, relied on the subtle tells that betrayed a lie. A fleeting glance, a tightened jaw, a pause too long or too short. He watched now, his eyes moving from one guest to another, noting every detail with the precision of a watchmaker. Lady Beatrice was the first to respond, her voice steady but with a faint tremor. It's no secret, Monsieur Poirot. The locket has been in the Ashford family for generations. We all knew it was priceless, not just for the diamonds but for its history. Her words were measured, but Poirot caught the way her fingers tightened on the napkin, crumpling the fine linen. Charles shifted in his seat, his pale blue eyes darting to his mother before dropping again. Common knowledge, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Everyone here's heard Father talk about it. His tone was sullen, and Poirot noted the slight shake in his hand as he reached for his wineglass, the liquid trembling against the rim. Clara Duval's smile widened, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's with a boldness that bordered on defiance. "I'd heard of it, of course," she said, her voice light and melodic. "Lord Ashford is quite proud of his collection. But I'm afraid I'm not one for family heirlooms. I prefer my jewels to be modern." Her laugh was bright, but Poirot saw the way her fingers toyed with the stem of her glass, a restless motion that belied her casual tone. Mr. Harrow leaned forward, his broad shoulders filling the space. "Valuable, yes. But who'd be fool enough to steal it in a house full of people? Sounds like an inside job, if you ask me." His voice was loud, almost accusatory, and Poirot noted the way his eyes swept the table, lingering on Charles for a fraction too long. Miss Langley, when pressed, spoke so softly her words were nearly lost. I knew it was important, monsieur. The children mentioned it once or twice, but I never saw it." Her eyes remained fixed on her lap, and Poirot observed the rapid rise and fall of her chest, a sign of nerves that intrigued him. Poirot nodded, his expression serene, but his mind was already at work. Each response had been plausible, yet each carried a shadow of something unspoken. Lady Beatrice's protectiveness, Charles's evasiveness, Clara's calculated charm, Harrow's aggressive deflection, Miss Langley's fear, all were threads in the tapestry of deceit that Poirot was determined to unravel. "Merci," he said, his voice smooth. "It is helpful to know who was aware of this treasure. But let us consider the circumstances. The locket, it was kept in a locked case, oui? And the lock was forced. This suggests either great boldness or great desperation. Tell me, monseigneur, who had access to your study?" Ashford's face tightened, his fingers drumming lightly on the table, a habit Poirot had noted earlier. "Only myself and Grayson, the butler, have keys. The staff have been with us for years, and I trust them implicitly. But the study is not always locked during the day. Guests, family, anyone could have entered." Poirot's eyes flickered. To Grayson, who stood by the sideboard, his posture rigid, his face impassive. The butler's presence was unobtrusive, yet Poirot sensed a watchfulness in him, as if he too were observing the room. "And you, Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, turning to him. "You saw nothing unusual last night?" Grayson's eyes met Poirot's briefly, then dropped. "No, sir. I locked the study at 10, as is my custom. Everything was in order." Poirot nodded, but his mind noted the butler's slight hesitation, the way his hands clasped together a touch too tightly. Another thread to pull, he thought. The conversation shifted, the guests attempting to regain their composure, but the air remained charged. Poirot excused himself shortly after dessert, citing a need for fresh air, but in truth he wanted to observe the manor's layout and the behavior of its inhabitants away from the formal setting of the dining hall. He slipped into the corridor, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet, and made his way to the grand staircase that led to the upper floors. The manor was a labyrinth of rooms and passages, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Ashfords, their eyes seeming to follow him as he passed. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of old wood and lavender, and Poirot's senses were alert to every detail: the creak of a floorboard, the flicker of a candle, the distant murmur of voices. He paused by a tall window overlooking the Zoo gardens where the mist had thickened, cloaking the grounds in an eerie gray veil. The faint outline of the fountain was visible, its stone cherubs glistening with moisture. Poirot's thoughts turned to the locket, a small object, yet heavy, with significance. Its theft was no random act. It was deliberate, calculated, and likely tied to the tensions he had sensed among the guests. But what was the motive? Greed, revenge, or something deeper, rooted in the secrets each carried? As he stood there, he heard footsteps behind him, soft but deliberate. He turned to see Miss Langley, her gray dress blending into the shadows, her face pale and her eyes wide with what might have been fear or guilt. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect to see you here." "Mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his tone gentle but his eyes sharp. "The night, it is conducive to reflection, is it not?" You seem troubled. Perhaps you wish to share something with Poirot? Her lips parted, and for a moment he thought she might speak. But then she shook her head, her hands twisting together. No, monsieur, it's nothing. I should return to my room. She turned and hurried away, her footsteps echoing faintly. In the silent hall, Poirot watched her go, his mind noting the encounter. Miss Langley, fearful, evasive, hiding something, possibly connected to the family. He opened his small leather notebook and jotted down the observation, his neat handwriting filling the page with precise, deliberate strokes. Then he continued his exploration, moving toward the study where the locket had been kept. The study was at the end of a long corridor, its heavy oak door slightly ajar. Poirot pushed it open, his eyes scanning the room. It was a masculine space, with dark wood paneling, a large desk cluttered, with papers and shelves lined with leather-bound books. A glass-fronted cabinet stood against one wall, its lock visibly damaged, the wood splintered where force had been applied. Poirot approached, his magnifying glass in hand, and examined the lock closely. The scratches were fresh. The damage. Chapter 4. The Art of Observation. The morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Ashford Manor's drawing room, casting a soft golden glow across the ornate furnishings. The room was a testament to the Ashford family's legacy. Walls, adorned with gilt-framed portraits, a grand piano in one corner, and a collection of porcelain figurines arranged with meticulous care on a mahogany sideboard. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from a vase of fresh-cut flowers, mingling with the richer aroma of coffee served from a silver pot. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair near the window, his small, precise frame almost swallowed by its grandeur, yet his presence was commanding. His gray suit was immaculate, his patent leather shoes gleamed, and his mustache curved with the symmetry of a well-practiced art. In his hands, he held a delicate porcelain cup, the steam rising in lazy curls, but his sharp green eyes were fixed on the room's occupants, not the coffee. The guests had gathered for a late breakfast, the tension from the previous night's revelation about the stolen locket still palpable. Lord Reginald Ashford sat at the head of a smaller table, his silver hair catching the light as he stirred his tea with a distracted air. Lady Beatrice, beside him, maintained a composed smile, but her fingers toyed with the edge of her napkin, betraying a quiet unease. Charles Ashford slouched in his chair, his eyes red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept, his fork pushing scrambled eggs around his plate without purpose. Clara Duval, the heiress, was a vision in a pale pink dress, her golden hair catching the sunlight, as she chatted animatedly with Mr. Edward Harrow, whose loud laugh filled the room but seemed to Poirot a touch too forced. Miss Langley, the governess, sat at the far end, her gray dress blending into the background, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on her untouched plate. Poirot sipped his coffee, his movements deliberate, but his mind was a whirlwind of observation. The night before, in the wake of Lord Ashford's announcement, he had sensed the first threads of deceit weaving through the group. Now, in the clear light of morning, he intended to test those threads, to pull gently and see which would unravel. His method, which he often described to his friend Captain Hastings as the art of observation, was not merely about seeing but about understanding. A lie, he knew, was rarely a single act. It was a tapestry of gestures, words, and silences, each revealing a piece of the truth to those who knew how to look. He set his cup down with a soft clink and turned to Lord Ashford, his voice calm but carrying the weight of intent. Monseigneur, this locket of which you spoke last night, it is a piece of great beauty, oui? Perhaps you could describe it for us, so that we might all keep an eye out for it. Ashford looked up, his face momentarily brightening at the chance to speak of the heirloom. It's a remarkable piece, Poirot. Gold, intricately filigreed, with a central diamond the size of a quail's egg, surrounded by smaller stones. It was my great-grandmother's, passed down through the women of the family. There's an inscription inside, in French, pour toujours, fidèle, forever faithful. Poirot nodded, his eyes flicking to Lady Beatrice, whose smile tightened at the mention of the inscription. "A most sentimental piece," he said, "and one that would be difficult to mistake. Tell me, madam, have you worn it often?" Lady Beatrice's fingers stilled on her napkin, and she met Poirot's gaze with a practiced calm. "Not often, Monsieur Poirot. It's rather heavy for everyday wear, and I prefer simpler jewelry. But I've worn it for special occasions, family gatherings mostly." Her voice was steady, but Poirot noted the slight dilation of her pupils, a sign of discomfort she could not fully conceal. Charles, who had been silent, suddenly spoke, his voice sharp. "It's just a trinket, mother. Why make such a fuss? It'll turn up." His tone was dismissive, but his hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly, and he turned to Charles. "A trinket, monsieur." "Charles, yet your father calls it priceless. Perhaps you have seen it recently, no? In the study, perhaps?" Charles's face flushed, and he looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't poke around in father's study. I was in London until yesterday. Ask anyone." His words were quick, almost rehearsed, and Poirot noted the way his eyes darted to Clara, as if seeking confirmation. Clara, catching the glance, laughed, lightly, her voice like a bell. "Oh, Charles, you're always so dramatic. I'm sure Monsieur Poirot doesn't think you stole it. Do you, monsieur?" She leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto Poirot's, her smile both charming and challenging. "Mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his tone mild, "I think nothing yet. I observe. And I listen. The truth, it reveals itself to those who pay attention." His words were gentle, but his gaze held hers, and for a moment her smile faltered, her fingers brushing her hair in a nervous gesture. Mr. Harrow, who had been watching the exchange with a keen interest, leaned back in his chair, his ruddy face creasing in a grin. "Well, I say we search the house top to bottom. Can't have a thief running about, can we? I'll start with the servants' quarters. Never know what they get up to." His tone was jovial, but Poirot caught the edge in it, the way his eyes lingered on Grayson, who stood silently by the door. Miss Langley, who had yet to speak, flinched at Harrow's words, her hands clenching in her lap. Poirot turned to her, his voice soft but insistent. "And you, Mademoiselle Langley? You have been very quiet. Have you perhaps seen something unusual? A stranger in the house, perhaps, or a guest where they should not be?" Her eyes widened and she shook her head quickly, her voice barely audible. "No, monsieur, I keep to my duties. The children keep me busy." Her words were clipped, and Poirot noted the rapid rise and fall of her chest, the way her gaze flicked to Charles before dropping again. Poirot leaned back, satisfied for the moment. Each response had given him a piece of the puzzle, a glimpse into the minds of those around him. Lady Beatrice's discomfort, Charles's defensiveness, Clara's calculated charm, Harrow's aggression, Miss Langley's fear, all were clues, small but significant. He excused himself from the table, claiming a desire to explore the Manor's library, but in truth, he sought a moment to consult with his old friend, Captain Hastings, who, though absent, was ever present in Poirot's mind as a sounding board. He found a quiet corner in the library, a vast room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, the air heavy with the scent of old leather and dust. A large window overlooked the gardens where the mist had begun to lift, revealing the manicured hedges and the distant fountain. Poirot sat at a small table, his leather notebook open before him, and began to write. Lady Beatrice, hiding something, possibly protective of Charles. Charles, agitated, likely involved in something he wishes to conceal. Clara, charming but manipulative, perhaps allied with Charles. Harrow, deflective, overly eager to point fingers. Miss Langley, fearful, possibly aware of a secret. Grayson, observant, potentially key. He paused, his pen hovering over the page, and imagined what Hastings would say. Good Lord, Poirot. He could hear his friend's voice, earnest and slightly exasperated. They're all hiding something. How do you make sense of it? And Poirot would smile, his mustache twitching, and reply, Mon ami, it is not about making sense. It is about seeing clearly. The truth is in the details, and the details are in the observation. He closed the notebook and rose, his eyes scanning the library. The shelves were filled with classics, Dickens, Thackeray, Balzac, but one section caught his attention. A collection of books on gemology and antique jewelry, their spines worn from use. He pulled one down, a heavy tome titled Treasures of the British Isles, and flipped to a page marked with a ribbon. There, in precise detail, was a description of the Ashford locket, complete with a sketch of its filigreed design and the inscription, Pour toujours fidèle. The book noted its value not just in monetary terms but as a symbol of family loyalty. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. The locket was more than a jewel. It was a key to the family's heart, and its theft was a wound that cut deep. He returned the book to the shelf and made his way to the study, where the locket had been kept. The room was as he had left it the previous night, the glass-fronted cabinet still bearing the marks of the forced lock. He examined it again, his magnifying glass revealing fresh scratches that suggested a tool like a screwdriver or a knife. The precision of the damage intrigued him. It was not the work of an amateur. He moved to the desk where the photograph of Lord Ashford and Charles still lay, and studied it closely. The boy in the image was no older than 10, his smile wide and unguarded, a stark contrast to the sullen young man at breakfast. What had changed, Poirot wondered, to turn that boy into a man so burdened? As he pondered, he heard footsteps outside the study, light but hurried. He stepped to the door and opened it to find Clara Duval, her face flushed as if she had been running. "Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, her hand flying to her chest, "you startled me. I was just looking for a book." "In the study, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, his tone mild, but his eyes sharp. "The library, it is more suited to such pursuits, non?" Her laugh was quick, a touch too bright. "You're right, of course. I must have taken a wrong turn. This house is a maze." She turned to go, but Poirot's voice stopped her. Chapter 5. A Hidden Motive. The morning mist had burned away, leaving Ashford Manor bathed in the pale sunlight of a crisp autumn day. The gardens stretched out beyond the tall windows of the morning room, where Hercule Poirot sat alone, a cup of steaming tisane cradled in his hands. The room was smaller than the grand dining hall, its walls papered in soft cream with delicate floral patterns, and a single chandelier hung above, its crystals catching the light in fleeting prisms. The air carried the faint scent of fresh bread from the breakfast tray and the sharper tang of polished wood. Poirot's gray suit was immaculate, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the occasional dampness of the manor's stone floors. His mustache, meticulously groomed, curved with the precision of a draftsman's compass, and his sharp green eyes scanned the room, though his thoughts were elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle of the stolen locket. The events of the previous night, the tense dinner, the guarded glances, the first lie, had set the stage for a deeper investigation. Poirot's method, which he called the art of observation, was already yielding results. Charles Ashford's agitation, Clara Duval's calculated charm, Mr. Harrow's aggressive deflection, Miss Langley's palpable fear, and Lady Beatrice's protective tension. Each was a thread in the tapestry of deceit, and Poirot was determined to weave them into a coherent picture. The locket, he suspected, was more than a stolen jewel. It was a catalyst, exposing the hidden motives that simmered beneath the manor's polished surface. He set his tisane down with a soft clink and opened his leather-bound notebook, its pages already filled with neat, precise handwriting. He wrote, "The locket, a symbol of family loyalty yet stolen from within. Charles, burdened, possibly guilty. Clara, charming but secretive, perhaps complicit. Harrow, defensive, eager to shift blame. Miss Langley, afraid, hiding a truth. Lady Beatrice, guarding her family, but at what cost? Grayson, too observant, too silent." He paused, his pen hovering, then added, "A motive lies beneath. But whose?" The door creaked open, and Poirot looked up to see Captain Hastings, his old friend, who had arrived unexpectedly late the previous night, summoned by a telegram from Poirot himself. Hastings was a tall, lanky man with an earnest face and a mustache that, while respectable, lacked Poirot's precision. His tweed suit was slightly rumpled from travel, but his eyes were bright with the enthusiasm that Poirot always found both endearing and exasperating. "Good morning, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice cheerful as he crossed the room. "I say, this place is a bit grand, isn't it? All these portraits and chandeliers makes me feel like I've stepped into a novel. What's this about a stolen locket?" Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Mon ami, you arrive at the perfect moment. The locket, it is the spark that lights the fire of suspicion. But come, sit. I shall explain, and you shall listen, though I trust you will not interrupt too often." Hastings chuckled, pulling up a chair. "I'll do my best, old chap. Now tell me everything." Poirot leaned forward, his voice low and measured. "The locket, a family heirloom of great value, was stolen from a locked case in Lord Ashford's study. The lock was forced, the act deliberate. The guests, Lord Ashford, his wife Lady Beatrice, their son Charles, the heiress Clara Duval, the businessman Mr. Harrow, and the governess Miss Langley, all claim ignorance. Yet each, Hastings, betrays a secret in their manner. The art of observation, it reveals the truth where words conceal it." Hastings frowned, his brow creasing. "Sounds like a proper mess. But who do you think took it? That Charles fellow seems a bit shifty, if you ask me." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Patience, mon ami. To suspect is easy, to know is the challenge. But I have a theory, a motive perhaps, that lies with Mademoiselle Duval. She is charming. Oui, but beneath her charm I sense a desperation. Come, let us join the others. I wish to test this theory." They made their way to the drawing room where the guests were gathered for mid-morning coffee. The room was airy, with tall windows, overlooking the gardens and a fire crackling in the hearth. Lady Beatrice sat on a velvet settee, her hands folded gracefully, though her eyes darted to Charles, who stood by the window, staring out at the grounds. Clara Duval perched on an armchair, her pale pink dress catching the light, her smile as radiant as ever. Mr. Harrow stood by the fireplace, a cigar in hand, his loud voice recounting a business deal to no one in particular. Miss Langley sat apart, her gray dress blending into the shadows, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Poirot took a seat near Clara, his movements deliberate, and accepted a cup of coffee from Grayson, the butler, whose impassive face betrayed nothing. Hastings settled beside him, his eyes wide with curiosity. Poirot turned to Clara, his voice soft but probing. "Mademoiselle Duval, you spoke last night of your travels, Paris, Monte Carlo, Venice. Such adventures must require considerable means, no?" Clara's smile didn't waver, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of her fingers around her cup. "Oh, I manage, Monsieur Poirot. An heiress learns to make her fortune stretch." Her laugh was light, but her eyes flicked to Harrow, a fleeting glance that Poirot caught. "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone genial. "But the life of an heiress, it is not always as secure as it seems. Debts, perhaps, or obligations. These can weigh heavily, even on one so accomplished." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and Poirot's keen senses registered the change, the slight dilation of her pupils, the way her posture stiffened. "I assure you, monsieur, my finances are quite in order," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of defensiveness. "I've no need to steal trinkets, if that's what you're implying." Poirot inclined his head, his expression serene. "I imply nothing, mademoiselle. I merely observe. And I wonder, have you perhaps heard rumors of financial trouble? In London, such things travel quickly." Clara's laugh was sharper now, almost brittle. "London is full of gossip, monsieur. I pay it no mind." She turned to Lady Beatrice, deftly changing the subject. "Lady Beatrice, tell me about the gardens. They're simply divine." Poirot leaned back, satisfied. The seed was planted, and Clara's reaction had confirmed his suspicion. She was hiding something, possibly a financial strain that made the locket's value tempting. He made a mental note to investigate her background further, perhaps through discreet inquiries with the Manor's staff or a telegram to his contacts in London. Hastings, sensing Poirot's shift in focus, leaned closer and whispered, "I say, Poirot, you think she's the thief?" "She's awfully charming for a criminal." Poirot's lips twitched. "Charme, mon ami, is often the mask of deceit, but we must not rush to judgment. Come, let us walk the grounds. The fresh air, it clears the mind." They excused themselves and stepped into the gardens where the air was crisp and the paths lined with gravel that crunched under Poirot's polished shoes. The hedges were trimmed to perfection, the roses still blooming despite the late season, and the distant fountain glistened in the sunlight. Poirot's eyes scanned the scene, noting the gardener, an older man with weathered hands, who was now raking leaves near a stone bench. His movements were slow, deliberate, and Poirot filed away the detail, wondering if the man had seen anything unusual the night of the theft. As they walked, Poirot explained his method to Hastings, his voice low and earnest. "To detect a lie, mon ami, one must look beyond the words. The eyes, they betray the heart. The hands, they reveal the nerves. The voice, it carries the weight of truth or falsehood. Last night, when Lord Ashford spoke of the locket, I saw fear in Miss Langley's eyes, anger in Charles's posture, calculation in Clara's smile. These are the signs we must follow." Hastings nodded, though his expression was skeptical. "But how do you know which sign matters? They all seem guilty to me." Poirot smiled, his mustache twitching. "That, Hastings, is why you are not Poirot. The signs, they are like notes in a symphony. Alone, they are noise. Together, they create music. We must listen carefully." They paused by the fountain, where Poirot's gaze lingered on the stone, cherubs, their faces worn by time. He thought of the locket's inscription, "Pour toujours fidèle," and wondered if loyalty was at the heart of this mystery. Was the theft an act of betrayal, or was it meant to protect someone? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, and he turned to see Miss Langley approaching, her gray dress stark against the vibrant gardens. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling. I need to speak with you." "Alone." She glanced at Hastings, who took the hint and stepped away, muttering something about inspecting the roses. Poirot gestured to the bench. "Mademoiselle, please, what troubles you?" She sat, her hands twisting the handkerchief into knots. "It's about Charles," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's not himself. I overheard him last night in the library talking to someone. I couldn't hear much, but he sounded desperate. I think he's in trouble." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained gentle. "Trouble, mademoiselle? Of what kind?" She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know. But he's not a thief, monsieur. He's a good man, just lost. Please don't think the worst of him." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "Merci, mademoiselle. Your candor is most helpful. But tell me, why do you protect him so fiercely?" Her face paled and she stood abruptly. Chapter 6. The Governess's Secret. The morning sun cast long, golden rays across the manicured gardens of Ashford Manor, painting the dew-kissed roses with a shimmering glow. Inside the manor, the breakfast room was a haven of quiet elegance, its walls adorned with pale blue silk and delicate watercolor paintings of pastoral scenes. A crystal chandelier hung above a polished walnut table, where silver trays held an array of pastries, fresh fruit, and a steaming pot of coffee. The air was fragrant with the scent of buttery croissants and the faint floral note of lavender from a vase near the window. Hercule Poirot sat at the table, his small, precise frame almost dwarfed by the high-backed chair, yet his presence filled the room. His gray suit was immaculate, his patent leather shoes gleamed, and his mustache curved with the symmetry of a master craftsman's work. In his hands, he held a delicate porcelain cup, the coffee's aroma mingling with his thoughts as he reviewed the events of the previous night. The midnight meeting between Clara Duval and Charles Ashford at the fountain had confirmed Poirot's suspicions. The locket was not lost, but hidden, and the two were conspirators in a scheme that went beyond mere theft. Clara's sharp command and Charles's desperate tone suggested a plan driven by necessity. But what? Greed? Blackmail? Or something deeper? tied to the family secret Lord Ashford had hinted at. Poirot's sharp green eyes scanned the room, noting the absence of Miss Langley, the governess whose fear and silence had intrigued him from the start. Her brief confession about Charles's troubles had been a crack in her guarded facade, and Poirot was determined to pry it open. Captain Hastings entered, his tweed suit slightly rumpled from a restless night, his face bright with the enthusiasm that Poirot both cherished and found mildly exasperating. "Morning, Poirot," he said, helping himself to a croissant. "I say, that was quite a night. Did you learn anything at the fountain?" Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Mon ami, you are as impatient as ever. Oui, I learned much. Mademoiselle Duval and Monsieur Charles are entangled in a plot, and the locket, it is not lost but concealed. But today we turn our attention to another, Mademoiselle Langley. Her silence, it speaks louder than words." Hastings frowned, chewing thoughtfully. "The governess? She's awfully quiet, but she doesn't strike me as the thieving type. Too nervous, if anything." "Précisément," Poirot said, his voice low. "Nervousness, it is the shadow of a secret, and I intend to uncover it. Come, we shall seek her out." They finished their coffee and stepped into the corridor, where the manor's grandeur enveloped them. The walls were lined with portraits of Ashford ancestors, their stern gazes seeming to follow Poirot as he moved with deliberate grace, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet. The air carried the scent of old wood and beeswax, and the distant clink of china suggested the staff were clearing the breakfast trays. Poirot's mind was a whirl of observation, cataloging every detail: the faint scuff on a baseboard, the slightly crooked frame of a painting, the soft murmur of voices from the drawing room. They found Miss Langley in the library, a vast room of towering shelves and leather-bound books, its windows overlooking the gardens where the morning light danced on the fountain. She sat at a small table, a book open before her, but her eyes were fixed on the page without reading, her hands twisting a handkerchief into knots. Her gray dress blended into the shadows, and her brown hair, pulled back severely, gave her a ghostly air. She started as Poirot and Hastings entered, her hazel eyes wide with alarm. "Mademoiselle Langley," Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm. "Forgive the intrusion. May we join you?" She nodded, her hands trembling as she closed the book, a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets, Poirot noted, its pages worn from frequent use. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just reading." Poirot took a seat across from her, his posture impeccable, while Hastings stood by the window, pretending to admire the view but clearly listening. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, "you spoke yesterday of Monsieur Charles, of his troubles. I sense you know more than you have shared. Will you not confide in Poirot? The truth, it is a burden best shared." Her face paled, and her fingers tightened on the handkerchief, tearing a small thread loose. I don't know what you mean, monsieur. I only said he seemed troubled. I didn't mean to imply—" "Non, Poirot interrupted, his tone soothing but insistent. "You mistake me. I do not accuse. I observe. And I see in you a great loyalty, perhaps to this family, perhaps to Monsieur Charles. But loyalty, it can blind us to the truth. Tell me, what do you fear?" Her eyes darted to the door as if expecting an interruption, then back to Poirot. For a moment he thought she might flee, but then her shoulders slumped and she spoke, her voice trembling. "It's not my place to say, monsieur, I'm only the governess, but Charles, he's in trouble. I overheard him in London before I came here. He was with men, rough men, not the sort he should know. They spoke of debts, large ones. I think he's desperate." Poirot's eyes gleamed, but his expression remained serene. "Debts, mademoiselle? This is most interesting. And you? Why do you protect him?" Her lips parted, and for a moment he thought she might reveal more. But then her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I care for him, monsieur. He's like a brother to me. I've known him since he was a boy when I taught his cousins. I can't bear to see him ruined." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Miss Langley, loyal to Charles, perhaps emotionally bound. A secret not of theft, but of protection. He leaned forward, his voice soft. Merci, mademoiselle. Your candor is a light in the darkness, but tell me, have you seen anything unusual in the manor? A guest where they should not be, perhaps? She hesitated, her eyes dropping to the table. I saw Clara, Miss Duval, in the corridor near the study, late last night. She was hurried, as if she didn't want to be seen. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Most interesting. And you told no one? I didn't think it mattered, she said quickly. She's a guest. She could have been lost. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone neutral. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. He rose, gesturing for Hastings to follow, and they left the library, Miss Langley's eyes following them with a mixture of relief and fear. Outside in the corridor, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. Good Lord, Poirot, she's practically shaking. Do you think she's telling the truth? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. She tells the truth, mon ami, but not the whole truth. Her loyalty to Charles, it blinds her. But her mention of Clara. This is a thread we must follow. Come, let us explore the manor further. They wandered the corridors, Poirot's eyes scanning every detail, the polished brass of a door handle, the faint dust on a picture frame, the soft creak of a floorboard. He paused by the study where the locket had been stolen and examined the broken cabinet again, his magnifying glass revealing the same precise scratches he had noted before. The theft, he thought, was not impulsive but planned, and Clara's presence near the study suggested she was more involved than she let on. As they moved toward the drawing room, they passed Lady Beatrice, who was arranging flowers in a vase. Her hands moved with practiced grace, but Poirot noted the slight tremor in her fingers, the way her eyes darted to the corridor as if expecting someone. Madam, he said, bowing slightly. The flowers, they are exquisite. A passion of yours, perhaps, she smiled, but it was strained. A small pleasure, Monsieur Poirot, it keeps me occupied. Her voice was calm, but Poirot caught the fleeting glance toward the drawing room, where Charles's voice could be heard, low and agitated. He tested her with a gentle probe. The locket, madame. It must be a great loss to you. A symbol of family, oui. Her hands stilled and her smile faltered. Yes, monsieur, it's irreplaceable, but I trust you'll find it. Her words were polite, but Poirot noted the tension in her posture, the way her eyes avoided his. He nodded, filing away the observation. Lady Beatrice, protective, perhaps complicit in hiding Charles's troubles. He and Hastings entered the drawing room where Clara and Harrow were engaged in a lively conversation, their laughter filling the air. Clara's eyes met Poirot's, and her smile widened, but he saw the calculation behind it, the way her fingers brushed her sleeve in, a nervous tick. Monsieur Poirot, she called, her voice bright. Join us. Mr. Harrow was just telling me about his latest venture, a steel mill in Birmingham. Fascinating stuff. Harrow grinned, his ruddy face creasing. Nothing fascinating about it, Miss Duval. Just business. But I'd wager Monsieur Poirot has more interesting tales. Detective work, eh? Poirot inclined his head, his tone genial. Business, Monsieur Harrow. It is its own kind of detective work, no? You must observe, calculate, anticipate. Have you perhaps observed anything unusual here at the manor? Harrow's grin faded slightly and he leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Can't say I have. Been too busy enjoying the hospitality. But if you're looking for suspects, I'd start with the staff. Servants always know more than they let on. Poirot nodded, noting the deflection. Harrow, quick to blame others, possibly to divert attention. He turned to Clara, his voice soft. And you, mademoiselle? You were seen near the study last night, a late-night stroll, perhaps. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered. I got turned around. Chapter 7. The Midnight Incident. The night enveloped Ashford Manor in a velvet shroud, the moon obscured by heavy clouds that promised more rain. Inside, the grand corridors were silent, save for the occasional creak of ancient floorboards and the faint tick of a grandfather clock echoing through the halls. Hercule Poirot stood in his room, a modest yet elegant chamber on the second floor, its tall windows overlooking the gardens where the fountain's silhouette was just visible in the dim light. His gray suit had been replaced by a silk dressing gown, but his posture remained impeccable. His polished shoes set neatly by the door and his mustache retained its perfect symmetry. The room smelled faintly of lavender from a sachet in the wardrobe, mingling with the crisp scent of starched linens. Poirot's small leather notebook lay open on the bedside table, its pages filled with precise handwriting cataloging the day's observations. Clara's evasiveness, Charles's desperation, Miss Langley's fear, Harrow's deflection, Lady Beatrice's protectiveness, and Grayson's silent watchfulness. The revelation at the fountain, Clara and Charles's clandestine meeting, their mention of the locket, being safe, had sharpened Poirot's focus. The theft was no random act. It was part of a calculated scheme, and Miss Langley's confession about Charles's debts had provided a motive. Yet Poirot sensed a deeper layer, a secret tied to the locket's inscription, Pour toujours fidèle, and Lord Ashford's cryptic reference to a family matter. His mind, ever orderly, was constructing a mental map of the manor's inhabitants, their motives, and their lies. Tonight, he resolved to remain vigilant, for the night, he knew, was when secrets moved in the shadows. He extinguished the lamp, leaving only the soft glow of a single candle, and positioned himself by the window, his eyes scanning the darkened gardens. The manor was quiet, but Poirot's senses were alert, attuned to the slightest disturbance. At precisely 11:30, he heard it, a faint rustling from the corridor followed by the soft click of a door. He slipped on his overcoat, tucked his notebook into his pocket, and stepped silently into the hall, his movements as precise as a cat's. The corridor was dimly lit by wall sconces, their flickering light casting long shadows across the portraits of Ashford ancestors, their stern faces seeming to watch his every step. He moved toward the staircase, pausing at the top to listen. The sound came again, a muffled thud from the ground floor, near the study where the locket had been stolen. Poirot descended, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet, his hand brushing the polished banister. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of beeswax and old wood, and as he reached the lower hall he heard a sharp, piercing scream that shattered the silence. Poirot's heart quickened, but his composure remained unshaken. He hurried toward the source, the study, where a small crowd was already gathering. Lord Ashford stood in the doorway, his face pale, his silver hair disheveled. Lady Beatrice was beside him, her hands clutching his arm, her emerald dressing gown askew. Charles was there, his eyes wide with panic, while Clara Duval hovered nearby, her pale pink nightdress shimmering in the candlelight. Mr. Harrow stood at the back, his ruddy face creased with concern, and Miss Langley was half hidden, in the shadows, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl. Grayson, the butler, was already lighting additional candles, his movements calm but deliberate. "What has happened?" Poirot demanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Ashford turned, his eyes wild. "The study, Poirot. It's been broken into again. The window. It's shattered." Poirot stepped into the room, his eyes sweeping the scene. The study was much as he had left it, with its dark wood paneling, cluttered desk, and shelves of leather-bound books. But the tall window opposite the desk was indeed broken, shards of glass glinting on the floor, the curtains billowing in the cold night air. The glass-fronted cabinet, already damaged from the locket's theft, stood untouched, but a small table nearby had been overturned, its contents, a few books and a silver inkstand, scattered across the rug. Poirot approached the window, his magnifying glass in hand, and examined the damage. The glass was shattered outward, suggesting the break had come from within, not without. He noted the absence of footprints in the damp earth outside, despite the recent rain, and the way the glass shards were concentrated near the window, as if someone had struck it deliberately. "Curieux," he murmured, his mind racing. "This is no burglary but a performance." He turned to the group, his eyes scanning each face. "Who discovered this?" I did, Lady Beatrice said, her voice trembling. I couldn't sleep, so I came downstairs for a book. I heard a crash and I screamed. Poirot nodded, noting the slight flush in her cheeks, the way her hands twisted the edge of her gown. And you saw no one, madame? No, she said quickly, too quickly. It was dark. I only heard the glass break. Charles stepped forward, his voice sharp. It's obvious, isn't it? Someone tried to break in again, probably the same thief who took the locket. His eyes darted to Poirot, then away, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Clara's laugh was soft, almost mocking. Really, Charles, in this weather? A thief would have to be mad to come back. Her tone was light, but Poirot caught the way her eyes flicked to the broken window, a flicker of unease in her posture. Harrow grunted, his arms crossed. Sounds like someone's trying to cover their tracks. Smash a window, make it look like an outsider. Clever, but not clever enough. His gaze lingered on Charles, a challenge in his eyes. Miss Langley said nothing, her face pale, her hands clutching her shawl so tightly her knuckles whitened. Poirot's eyes lingered on her, noting the rapid rise and fall of her chest, the way her gaze avoided the window. Mademoiselle Langley, he said gently, you seem distressed. Did you hear anything before the scream? She shook her head, her voice barely audible. I was in my room, monsieur. I came when I heard Lady Beatrice. Her eyes darted to Charles, then back to the floor, and Poirot made a mental note. Miss Langley, fearful, possibly protecting Charles again. Grayson, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice steady. I checked the grounds, sir, no sign of an intruder, the gate is locked and the dogs didn't bark. His words were calm, but Poirot noted the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the room. Merci, Monsieur Grayson, Poirot said, his tone neutral. Your diligence is most appreciated. He turned back to the window, his mind turning over the evidence. The broken glass, the absence of footprints, the overturned table. It was all too neat, too staged. This was no second burglary, but a deliberate act to mislead, to shift suspicion outward. But by whom? And why? He addressed the group, his voice calm but commanding. Mes amis, this incident, it is most curious. The window, it is broken from within, not without. The glass, it tells the truth where people may not. I propose we return to our rooms and allow me to investigate further. The truth, it will not hide for long. The guests murmured their agreement, though their faces betrayed varying degrees of unease. Lady Beatrice clung to her husband's arm, her eyes pleading. Charles's jaw tightened, his hands still in his pockets. Clara's smile was strained, her fingers brushing her hair in a nervous tick. Harrow's grin was gone, replaced by a scowl. Miss Langley hurried away, her shawl trailing behind her like a ghost. Grayson remained, lighting the last of the candles, his face unreadable. Poirot lingered in the study, his magnifying glass moving over the glass shards, the table, the rug. He noted the absence of dirt or grass on the floor, which would have been present if an intruder had entered. The table's contents were scattered but not broken, suggesting a careful staging rather than a struggle. He moved to the desk where the photograph of Lord Ashford and a young Charles still lay, and his eyes lingered on it. The boy's smile, so open and unguarded, contrasted sharply with the troubled man he had become. What had driven Charles to such desperation, Poirot wondered, and how did it connect to Clara's scheme? He stepped outside, the night air cold against his face, and examined the ground beneath the window. The earth was soft from the rain, yet there were no footprints, no signs of disturbance. He shone his small flashlight, a modern contraption he carried for such occasions, and confirmed his suspicion. The break-in was a fiction, designed to divert attention. But from what? The locket, already hidden, or something more? Returning to the study, he found Grayson still there, straightening the overturned table. Monsieur Grayson, Poirot said, his voice soft but probing, you are most diligent. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual tonight before the scream? Grayson's hands paused, then resumed their work. Nothing, sir. The house was quiet until Lady Beatrice's cry. His voice was steady, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of his jaw, a tell he had seen before. "Merci," Poirot said, filing away the observation. Grayson, too composed, possibly complicit. He left the study and made his way to the library, where he could think undisturbed. The room was dark, save for the moonlight streaming through the windows, and Poirot lit a single candle, its flame casting a soft glow across the shelves. He opened his notebook and wrote, "The window, broken from within, a staged act. Lady Beatrice claims to have heard the crash, but her story is too quick. Charles, defensive, possibly involved. Clara, mocking, but uneasy. Harrow, quick to accuse. High." Chapter 8. Unraveling Alibis. The morning after the midnight incident dawned crisp and clear, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows of Ashford Manor's morning room, casting a golden glow across the polished mahogany table. The room was a study in understated elegance, with cream-colored walls adorned with delicate watercolor landscapes and a crystal chandelier that refracted the light into fleeting rainbows. The air carried the faint scent of fresh scones and the sharper tang of coffee, mingling with the ever-present hint of lavender from a vase near the window. Hercule Poirot sat at the table, his small frame impeccable in a tailored gray suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming, and his mustache curved with the precision of a master craftsman. In his hands he held a delicate porcelain cup, the steam rising in lazy curls, but his sharp green eyes were fixed on the room's occupants, not the coffee. His leather-bound notebook lay open beside him, its pages filled with precise handwriting cataloging the events of the past days: the stolen locket, the staged break-in, the clandestine meeting between Clara and Charles, and Miss Langley's fearful confession. The midnight incident, the shattered study window, the overturned table, the absence of footprints, had confirmed Poirot's suspicion that the theft was an inside job, cloaked in a clumsy attempt to suggest an outside intruder. The guests' reactions had been revealing: Lady Beatrice's too-quick story, Charles's defensiveness, Clara's mocking unease, Harrow's accusatory tone, Miss Langley's silent fear, and Grayson's composed watchfulness. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot was determined to unravel their alibis, to find the cracks in their stories where the truth lay hidden. Captain Hastings entered, his tweed suit slightly rumpled, his face bright with the enthusiasm that Poirot found both endearing and exasperating. "Morning, Poirot," he said, helping himself to a scone. "That business with the window last night, quite a show, eh? Do you think it's the same person who took the locket?" Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Mon ami, you leap to conclusions like a hare. The window, it is a distraction, a performance to mislead. But the truth, it cannot hide from Poirot. Today, we shall test the alibis of our friends, to see whose story holds and whose crumbles." Hastings nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "Right then. Where do we start?" "With breakfast," Poirot said, his tone genial but his eyes sharp. "And with observation. The dining room, it is a stage, and we shall watch the actors perform." They made their way to the dining hall, where the guests were gathering for a late breakfast. The room was grand, its long oak table set with silver cutlery and fine china, the chandeliers overhead casting a warm glow. Lord Ashford sat at the head, his silver hair catching the light, his face etched with worry. Lady Beatrice beside him maintained a composed smile, but her hands toyed with her napkin, betraying a quiet unease. Charles slouched in his chair, his eyes red-rimmed, his fork moving mechanically through a plate of eggs. Clara Duval, radiant in a pale blue dress, chatted animatedly with Mr. Harrow, whose loud laugh filled the room but seemed forced. Miss Langley sat at the far end, her gray dress blending into the shadows, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Poirot took a seat opposite Lord Ashford, giving him a clear view of the group. He sipped his coffee, his movements deliberate, but his mind was a whirlwind of observation. He began with a seemingly innocuous question, designed to set the stage. "Mes amis," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "The incident last night, it is most troubling. To aid our investigation, I propose we each account for our movements at the time of the scream. A simple exercise. To clear the air." The suggestion was met with a ripple of unease. Lady Beatrice's smile tightened, her fingers crumpling her napkin. Charles's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to Clara. Clara's laugh was light, but her fingers brushed, her hair in a nervous tick. Harrow leaned back, his grin fading, while Miss Langley's hands trembled, her gaze fixed on her plate. Grayson, standing by the sideboard, remained impassive, but Poirot noted the slight tension in his shoulders. "I shall begin," Poirot said, his tone genial. "At the time of the scream, I was in my room, preparing for bed. I heard the cry, and came at once to the study. Now, Madame Beatrice, perhaps you will share your account?" Lady Beatrice straightened, her voice steady but with a faint tremor. "As I said last night, Monsieur Poirot, I couldn't sleep. I came downstairs for a book and heard the crash in the study. I screamed and ran to see what had happened." Her words were clear, but Poirot noted the way her eyes flicked to her husband, seeking reassurance, and the slight dilation of her pupils, a sign of discomfort. "Merci, madame," Poirot said, turning to Charles. "And you, Monsieur Charles?" Charles shifted, his face flushing. "I was in my room getting ready for bed. I heard the scream and came down, that's all." His voice was curt, and Poirot caught the way his hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Clara leaned forward, her smile dazzling. "I was in my room too, Monsieur Poirot. I'd just finished writing a letter when I heard the scream. I came at once, of course." Her tone was smooth, but Poirot noted the slight hesitation before writing a letter, a pause that suggested fabrication. Harrow grunted, his ruddy face creasing. "Same here, in my room reading the paper. Heard the scream, came running. Not much to it." His words were blunt, but Poirot saw the way his eyes darted to Clara, a flicker of complicity. Miss Langley spoke last, her voice barely audible. "I was with the children, checking on them. They were asleep, but I heard the scream and came down." Her eyes remained fixed on her lap, and Poirot noted the rapid rise and fall of her chest, a sign of fear. Grayson, when questioned, offered a simple account. "I was in the servants' hall, sir, preparing the morning schedule. I heard the scream and went to the study." His voice was steady, but Poirot caught the slight tightening of his jaw, a tell he had seen before. Poirot nodded, his expression serene, but his mind was racing. Each alibi was plausible, yet each carried a shadow of deceit. Lady Beatrice's story was too polished, Charles's too brief, Clara's too rehearsed, Harrow's too dismissive, Miss Langley's too fearful, and Grayson's too perfect. He decided to test them further, to pull at the threads and see which unraveled. "Most interesting," he said, his voice soft but commanding. "But let us be precise. Madame Beatrice, you say you came for a book. Which book, may I ask?" Her smile faltered, and she hesitated, her fingers twisting the napkin. "Oh, I hadn't chosen one yet. I was just browsing the shelves in the library." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "The library, madam? Yet the scream came from the study, which is on the opposite side of the house. Curious, non, that you heard the crash so clearly?" Her face paled, and she glanced at her husband. I must have been closer to the study than I thought. The corridors are confusing at night." Her words were rushed, and Poirot noted the slight tremor in her hands. He turned to Charles. "And you, Monsieur Charles, you were in your room. Yet, a maid mentioned seeing you in the hall earlier that evening, near the study. Perhaps you were restless, oui?" Charles' face flushed, and he glared at Poirot. "I might have gone for a walk. Doesn't mean I was in the study. I told you I was in my room when the scream happened." His voice was sharp, and Poirot caught the way his eyes darted to Clara, seeking support. Clara jumped in, her laugh light. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, you make it sound so sinister. Charles is always pacing about at night. He's like a caged lion." Her tone was teasing, but Poirot saw the way her fingers tightened around her cup, a nervous tick. Harrow leaned forward, his grin returning. "Sounds like you're fishing, Poirot. If you want my opinion, check the servants. They've got keys to every room in this place." His eyes flicked to Grayson, a challenge in his gaze. Miss Langley said nothing, her hands trembling, and Poirot decided not to press her yet. Her fear was a puzzle he would solve later. Instead, he turned to Grayson. "And you, Monsieur Grayson, you were in the servants' hall, yet you reached the study so quickly. Most efficient, non?" Grayson's face remained impassive. "It's my duty, sir, to respond promptly." His words were calm, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of his shoulders, a sign of tension. Poirot leaned back, satisfied for the moment. The alibis were cracking, revealing inconsistencies that pointed to a deeper truth. Lady Beatrice's story didn't align with the manor's layout. Charles's presence in the hall suggested involvement. Clara's rehearsed account hinted at fabrication. Harrow's deflection was too aggressive. Miss Langley's silence was too fearful, and Grayson's efficiency was too convenient. He made a mental note to investigate further, perhaps by speaking with the maid who had seen Charles or examining the library for signs of Lady Beatrice's presence. He excused himself from the table, claiming a need to review his notes, and beckoned Hastings to follow. They retreated to the library where the shelves of leather-bound books and the scent of old paper provided a quiet sanctuary. Poirot opened his notebook and wrote, "Lady Beatrice, lying about her whereabouts, possibly to protect someone. Charles, seen, near the study, likely involved. Clara, covering for Charles, part of the scheme. Harrow, deflecting, perhaps complicit. Miss Langley, silent, afraid of revealing too much. Grayson, too quick, possibly hiding knowledge." Chapter 9. The Psychology of Lies. The afternoon sun bathed Ashford Manor in a warm, golden light, filtering through the tall windows of the drawing room and casting intricate patterns across the polished parquet floor. The room was a masterpiece of elegance, with velvet-upholstered armchairs arranged around a low mahogany table, a grand fireplace adorned with a marble mantel, and walls lined with gilt-framed portraits of Ashford ancestors. A crystal vase of fresh roses stood on the sideboard, their scent mingling with the faint aroma of beeswax and the sharper tang of cigar smoke lingering from Mr. Harrow's earlier presence. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair near the window, his small, precise frame impeccable in a tailored gray suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming, and his mustache curved with the symmetry of a master craftsman. In his hands he held a small leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes on the stolen locket, the staged break-in, and the unraveling alibis of the manor's guests. His sharp green eyes scanned the room, though his thoughts were elsewhere, dissecting the web of lies that had entangled the household. The discovery of the key in the study, the inconsistencies in the guests' alibis, and the midnight meeting between Clara Duval and Charles Ashford had brought Poirot closer to the truth. The locket, he was certain, was hidden within the manor, part of a scheme driven by desperation, likely Charles's debts, as Miss Langley had hinted. Yet the staged break-in and the family secret Lord Ashford had alluded to suggested a deeper motive, one tied to loyalty and betrayal. Poirot's method, which he called the psychology of lies, was about more than observing gestures or catching contradictions. It was about understanding the emotions that drove deceit: fear, guilt, greed, or love. Today he intended to test the guests' emotions, to provoke reactions that would reveal the truth hidden beneath their carefully constructed facades. Captain Hastings entered, his tweed suit slightly crumpled, his face bright with curiosity. "Afternoon, Poirot," he said, settling into a chair opposite. "I say, this place is starting to feel like a pressure cooker. Everyone's on edge after that window business. What's our next move?" Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Mon ami, we shall turn up the heat. Lies, they are born of emotion, fear most often, or guilt. Today we shall observe how our friends react when their emotions are stirred. We shall have a discussion here in this room about the locket, and we shall watch Hastings, for the truth lies in the silences as much as the words." Hastings nodded, though his brow creased with skepticism. "Sounds like a tall order, Poirot. How do you know who's lying when they're all so good at it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Because, mon ami, no one is perfect. The lie, it is a weight, and even the strongest cannot carry it forever. Come, let us summon the others." He rang a small silver bell on the table, and Grayson, the butler, appeared promptly, his face as impassive as ever. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, his voice calm but authoritative, "please ask Lord Ashford and the guest to join us in the drawing room. I wish to discuss the matter of the locket." Grayson inclined his head, his eyes briefly meeting. Poirot's before he withdrew. Poirot noted the slight tension in the butler's posture, a subtle tell he had observed before. Grayson, always present, always watching, he thought, adding a mental note to his growing list. Within minutes, the guests began to arrive. Lord Ashford entered first, his silver hair catching the sunlight, his face etched with a mixture of worry and resolve. Lady Beatrice followed, her emerald gown replaced by a simpler day dress of soft gray, her hands clasped tightly as if to steady herself. Charles slouched in behind them, his pale blue eyes avoiding his father's, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Clara Duval swept in, her pale pink dress shimmering, her golden hair pinned loosely, her smile as radiant as ever, but with a hint of strain. Mr. Harrow lumbered in, his ruddy face creased with irritation, a cigar stub in his hand, despite the room's no-smoking rule. Miss Langley was last, her gray dress blending into the shadows, her hazel eyes fixed on the floor, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Poirot rose, his small stature commanding the room's attention. "Mes amis," he began, his voice clear and accented with the precise cadence of his Belgian heritage. "I thank you for joining me. The matter of the locket, it weighs heavily on us all. To find the truth, we must speak openly. Let us discuss this heirloom, its meaning, its value, and perhaps why it was taken." The suggestion was met with a murmur of unease. Lady Beatrice's hands tightened, her knuckles whitening. Charles shifted, his jaw clenching. Clara's smile flickered, her fingers brushing her hair. Harrow grunted, his eyes narrowing. Miss Langley's breathing quickened, almost imperceptibly. Lord Ashford nodded, his face grave. "Very well, Poirot. If it will help, I'm willing." Poirot gestured to the chairs, and the guests took their seats, forming a loose circle around the table. He began with Lord Ashford, his tone gentle but probing. "Monseigneur, you have said the locket is a symbol of your family's loyalty. Tell us, what does it mean to you?" Ashford leaned forward, his hands clasped. "It's more than a jewel, Poirot. It was my great-grandmother's, given to her by her husband on their wedding day. The inscription, pour toujours fidèle, is a vow of fidelity, not just to one another but to the family. It's been passed down through the women, a reminder of our duty to each other." His voice was steady, but Poirot noted the slight tremor in his fingers, a sign of emotional weight. Lady Beatrice spoke next, her voice soft but strained. "It's a beautiful tradition, Monsieur Poirot. I wore it on our wedding day, as did Reginald's mother before me. It's a bond, a promise." Her eyes flicked to Charles, then away, and Poirot caught the protective instinct in her gaze. Charles, when prompted, muttered, "It's just a piece of jewelry. People get too worked up about it." His tone was dismissive, but his hands gripped, the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. Poirot's eyes narrowed, noting the contradiction between his words and his body language. Clara's laugh was light, almost musical. "It sounds terribly romantic, Lord Ashford, but honestly, who'd risk stealing something so well known? It's not like you could sell it without everyone knowing." Her smile was dazzling, but Poirot saw the way her fingers toyed with her necklace, a nervous tick. Harrow leaned back, his cigar stub unlit but still in hand. "Sounds like a lot of fuss over a bauble. If it's that important, why wasn't it locked up tighter? No offense, Ashford, but your security's a bit lax." His tone was gruff, but his eyes darted to Clara, a flicker of complicity. Miss Langley, when pressed, spoke so softly her words were nearly lost. "It's a lovely piece, monsieur. The children spoke of it sometimes, how it sparkled, but I never thought—" Her voice trailed off, and her hands twisted the handkerchief into knots, her fear palpable. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but commanding. "Merci, all of you. Your words, they paint a picture of loyalty, of tradition. But a jewel so cherished it does not vanish without reason. Let us consider. Why would someone take it? Greed, perhaps? Or to wound the family? Or to hide a secret it holds? The question hung in the air, and the room fell silent. Then Charles erupted, his voice sharp and sudden. "This is ridiculous. You're all acting like I did it. I didn't touch the damn thing." He stood, his chair scraping against the floor, his face flushed with anger. Lady Beatrice reached for him, her hand trembling, but he pulled away, storming to the window. Poirot's eyes gleamed, but his expression remained serene. Charles, guilty or afraid? His outburst, it reveals much. He turned to Clara, whose silence, during Charles's outburst, was telling. "Mademoiselle Duval, you are very quiet. What do you think of Monsieur Charles's passion?" Clara's smile returned, but it was strained. "Oh, Charles is always dramatic, Monsieur Poirot. He's upset, that's all. Who wouldn't be, with everyone pointing fingers?" Her voice was smooth, but her fingers tightened around her necklace. A tell Poirot had come to recognize. Harrow grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Boy's got a temper, that's for sure. Makes you wonder what he's hiding." His words were pointed, and Poirot noted the way Charles's shoulders stiffened at the accusation. Miss Langley's eyes widened, and she spoke before she could stop herself. "He's not hiding anything. Charles is a good man." Her voice was louder than usual, and she flushed, her hands dropping to her lap as if regretting the outburst. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly, and he turned to her, his tone gentle. "Mademoiselle Langley, your loyalty, it is admirable, but loyalty, it can blind us. Have you perhaps seen something you wish to share?" Her face paled, and she shook her head, her eyes dropping to the floor. "No, monsieur, I spoke out of turn." Her fear was palpable, and Poirot made a mental note. Miss Langley, protective of Charles, perhaps to her own detriment. Lady Beatrice intervened, her voice firm. "Monsieur Poirot, this is becoming an inquisition. Charles is upset, as we all are. Can we not leave it to you to find the locket without tearing us apart?" Her eyes were pleading, but Poirot saw the tension in her posture, the way her hand rested protectively on her husband's arm. Lord Ashford nodded, his face grave. "Beatrice is right, Poirot. I trust you to handle this discreetly. But please, find the locket before this tears my family apart." Poirot inclined his head from all of us. His eyes swept the room, lingering. Chapter 10. The Weight of Truth. The morning mist clung to the gardens of Ashford Manor, weaving a delicate veil over the roses and the stone fountain that stood as a silent sentinel in the grounds. Inside, the morning room was a haven of quiet elegance, its cream-colored walls adorned with soft watercolor landscapes and a single chandelier casting prisms of light across the polished walnut table. The air was fragrant with the scent of freshly baked scones, strong coffee, and a faint hint of lavender from a vase near the window. Hercule Poirot sat at the table, his small frame impeccable in a tailored gray suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming and his mustache curved with the precision of a master craftsman. His sharp green eyes were fixed on the leather-bound notebook before him, its pages filled with meticulous notes on the stolen locket, the staged break-in, the unraveling alibis, and the emotional undercurrents that had surfaced during yesterday's discussion in the drawing room. The psychology of lies, as Poirot had demonstrated, had cracked open the facades of the guests. Charles Ashford's guilty outburst, Clara Duval's calculated silence, Miss Langley's protective loyalty, Lady Beatrice's strained protectiveness, Mr. Harrow's aggressive deflection, and Lord Ashford's quiet desperation. The locket, with its inscription "Pour toujours fidèle," was more than a jewel. It was a symbol of a family secret, and its theft was a deliberate act to exploit or conceal that secret. The discovery of the cabinet key, the midnight meeting at Two, the fountain, and the staged break-in all pointed to a conspiracy centered on Charles and Clara. But Poirot sensed a deeper truth, one that tied the entire household together in a web of loyalty and betrayal. Today, he intended to press harder, to confront the guests with the weight of their own truths and see who would break. Captain Hastings entered, his tweed suit slightly rumpled from a restless night, his face bright with the enthusiasm that Poirot found both endearing and exasperating. "Morning, Poirot," he said, helping himself to a scone and a generous pour of coffee. "That discussion yesterday was quite the show. Charles nearly jumped out of his skin. What's the plan now?" Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile as he closed his notebook. "Mon ami, we have stirred the pot, and now we must watch what rises to the surface. The truth, it is heavy, and those who carry lies cannot bear it long. Today, we shall confront our friends, not with accusations but with questions that touch the heart. We shall meet them individually in the library where the quiet will force them to face themselves." Hastings frowned, chewing thoughtfully. "Sounds risky, Poirot. What if they clam up? Or worse, what if Charles bolts?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "If he bolts, mon ami, it will tell us much, but I think not. Charles is trapped not by Poirot but by his own conscience. Come, let us begin." They made their way to the library, a vast room of towering shelves filled with leather-bound books, its tall windows overlooking the gardens where the mist was slowly lifting. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and polished wood, and a single armchair sat by a small table, where Poirot placed his notebook and a silver bell. He instructed Grayson, the butler, to summon the guests one by one, starting with Miss Langley, whose fear and loyalty made her a key to unlocking Charles's secret. Miss Langley entered, her gray dress blending into the shadows, her brown hair pulled back severely, her hazel eyes wide with apprehension. She clutched a handkerchief, its edges frayed from constant twisting, and sat hesitantly, her posture rigid. Poirot offered her a gentle smile, his voice soft but probing. "Mademoiselle Langley, you have been most kind to share your concerns about Monsieur Charles. I sense a great loyalty in you, a devotion to this family. But loyalty, it can be a burden. Will you not unburden yourself to Poirot?" Her lips parted and her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. I don't know what you mean, monsieur. I only want to help Charles. He's not a thief." Her voice trembled, and Poirot noted the rapid rise and fall of her chest, a sign of fear. He leaned forward, his tone soothing but insistent. "Non, mademoiselle, I do not believe he is a thief. But he is troubled, oui? You spoke of his debts, of rough men in London. Tell me, what do you fear for him? Is it these men? Or something closer to home?" Her hands twisted the handkerchief into knots, and a single tear escaped, tracing a path down her pale cheek. "He's in too deep, monsieur. I heard him in London, arguing with a man, a creditor, I think. He owed thousands, more than he could pay. I begged him to tell his father, but he wouldn't. He said he'd find a way." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Poirot's eyes gleamed, but his expression remained serene. "A way, mademoiselle? Perhaps with Mademoiselle Duval's help. You saw her near the study, you said. Do you think she is part of this way?" Miss Langley's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "I don't know. Clara, she's so confident, so sure of herself. Charles listens to her, more than he should. But I don't know what they're planning. Please, monsieur, don't tell him I said anything. He'd never forgive me." Poirot nodded, his voice gentle. "Your secret is safe with Poirot. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most brave." She rose, her hands trembling, and hurried from the room, leaving Poirot to jot in his notebook. Miss Langley confirms Charles's debts, fears Clara's influence, loyal to a fault but not complicit. Hastings, who had been standing by the window, turned to Poirot, his voice low. "Good Lord, Poirot, she's terrified for Charles. Do you think Clara's the mastermind?" Poirot's lips twitched. "Mastermind, perhaps, but not alone. Clara, she is a catalyst. But Charles, he is the key. Let us speak with him next." "Grayson," summoned Charles, who entered with a scowl, his silver hair disheveled, his pale blue eyes avoiding Poirot's. He slumped into the chair, his hands shoved in his pockets, his posture radiating defiance. "What now, Poirot? More questions?" "I've told you everything." His voice was sharp, but Poirot noted the slight tremor in his hands, a sign of nerves. Poirot leaned forward, his tone calm but piercing. Monsieur Charles, you are troubled. This is clear. Your outburst yesterday, it speaks of a man under pressure. Tell me what weighs on you. Is it the locket or something more personal? Charles's jaw clenched, and his eyes flashed with anger. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't take the locket, and I wasn't in the study when the window broke. Why don't you leave me alone? His voice rose, but Poirot saw the fear beneath the anger, the way his shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. Poirot's voice softened, almost paternal. Mon ami, I do not accuse. I seek to understand. You are young, with a bright future, yet you carry a burden. Debts, perhaps. I have heard whispers of such things. Will you not share with Poirot so that we may help you? Charles's face paled, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might speak, but then his expression hardened. You've been talking to that governess, haven't you? She's got no business spreading lies. I'm fine, Poirot, just drop it. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and stormed out, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Poirot opened his notebook and wrote, Charles, defensive, confirms debts indirectly. Afraid of exposure, likely manipulated by Clara. He turned to Hastings, his eyes gleaming. He is close to breaking, mon ami, but we must be patient. Next came Clara Duval, who swept into the room with the grace of a dancer, her pale pink dress catching the light, her golden hair shimmering. Her smile was dazzling, but Poirot saw the calculation in her dark eyes, the way her fingers brushed her sleeve in a nervous tick. She sat with an air of confidence, crossing her legs and leaning forward slightly. Monsieur Poirot, you're relentless, aren't you? What do you want to know now? Her voice was light, almost teasing, but Poirot caught the edge in it. He smiled, his tone genial but probing. Mademoiselle Duval, you are a woman of charm and intelligence. Yet I sense a restlessness in you, a need to prove yourself. The locket, it is valuable, oui? Valuable enough to solve financial difficulties, perhaps. Her smile faltered, and her fingers tightened on her sleeve, a tell Poirot had noted before. You're fishing, monsieur. I've no financial difficulties. My inheritance is quite sufficient, thank you. Her laugh was bright, but Poirot saw the slight dilation of her pupils, a sign of unease. He leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. And yet, mademoiselle, you were seen near the study the night of the theft, and again before the window was broken. You meet with Monsieur Charles in secret, at the fountain, speaking of the locket being safe. Tell me, what is your role in this affair? Her face paled, but her smile returned, though it was strained. You do have sharp eyes, monsieur. I was lost in the corridors, as I said. As for Charles, we're friends, nothing more. We talk about all sorts of things, hardly a crime. Her voice was smooth, but Poirot noted the rapid pulse at her throat, a sign of nerves. He nodded, letting her think she had deflected him. Merci, mademoiselle. Your candor is most refreshing. She rose, her smile triumphant. But Poirot's notebook entry was less forgiving. Clara, lying, deeply involved with Charles. Financial motive likely, manipulating his desperation. Lady Beatrice was next, her gray day dress a stark contrast to her usual elegance, her hands clasped tightly, as she sat, Harry. Chapter 11. The Locket's Hiding Place. The dawn broke over Ashford Manor with a pale, fragile light, filtering through the mist that clung to the gardens and softening the sharp edges of the stone fountain. Inside, the library was a sanctuary of quiet, its towering shelves of leather-bound books absorbing the faint sounds of the waking household. The air carried the scent of old paper, polished wood, and a trace of lavender from a sachet tucked into a corner. Hercule Poirot sat at a small oak table near a tall window, his small frame impeccable in a tailored gray suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming, and his mustache curved with the precision of a master craftsman. His sharp green eyes were fixed on his leather-bound notebook, its pages dense with meticulous notes on the stolen locket, the staged break-in, the unraveling alibis, and the family secret revealed by Lord Ashford. A hidden letter within the locket, a confession of scandal that could ruin the family's name. The previous day's interviews had brought Poirot closer to the truth. Charles Ashford's debts confirmed by Miss Langley were the spark, and Clara Duval's manipulation was the fuel, driving a scheme to use the locket's secret for leverage. Lady Beatrice's protectiveness, Mr. Harrow's deflections, and Miss Langley's fearful loyalty formed a web of complicity, while Grayson's silent efficiency hinted at deeper knowledge. The torn paper found in Charles's room, scented with lavender, linked him to Clara and the note from the study, suggesting the locket was still within the manor, hidden but accessible. Poirot's method, the psychology of lies, had exposed the emotions, fear, guilt, desperation, that drove the conspiracy, and now he was determined to find the locket's hiding place, to force the truth into the open. Captain Hastings entered, his tweed suit rumpled from a night of fitful sleep, his face bright with curiosity. "Morning, Poirot," he said, helping himself to a cup of coffee from a silver tray. Those interviews yesterday were something else. Charles looked ready to bolt, and Clara's as slippery as an eel. "What's next?" Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile as he closed his notebook. "Mon ami, we are close, so close to the heart of this mystery. The locket, it is here, hidden by Charles and Clara, a weapon in their scheme. Today we shall search, not with force, but with the mind. We shall retrace their steps, observe their haunts, and find where they have concealed it. But first we must unsettle them, make them fear the locket is no longer safe." Hastings frowned, sipping his coffee. "How do you plan to do that?" "They're already jumpy as cats," Poirot's eyes gleamed. "By suggestion, Hastings. A word, a glance, a hint that Poirot is near the truth. It will push them to act, to check their hiding place. And when they do, we shall be watching. Come, let us join the others for breakfast." They made their way to the dining hall where the guests were gathering under the glow of chandeliers, the long oak table set with fine china and silver. Lord Ashford sat at the head, his silver hair catching the light, his face heavy with worry. Lady Beatrice, beside him, wore a soft gray dress, her hands clasped tightly, her smile strained. Charles slouched in his chair, his eyes red-rimmed, his fork pushing food around his plate. Clara Duval, radiant in a pale green dress, chatted lightly with Mr. Harrow, whose loud laugh seemed forced, his ruddy face creased with tension. Miss Langley sat at the far end, her gray dress blending into the shadows, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Grayson, the butler, moved silently, serving coffee with a precision that Poirot found almost mechanical. Poirot took a seat opposite Charles, giving him a clear view of the group. He sipped his coffee, his movements deliberate, then spoke, his voice calm but carrying a subtle edge. "Mes amis, the locket, it remains elusive, yet I feel we are close to its discovery. A jewel so precious it cannot be far. Perhaps it is hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be revealed." His eyes lingered on Charles, then Clara, watching for their reactions. Charles's fork froze, his knuckles whitening as he gripped it. Clara's smile flickered, her fingers brushing her hair in a nervous tick. Lady Beatrice's hands tightened, her eyes darting to her son. Harrow grunted, his eyes narrowing, while Miss Langley's breathing quickened, almost imperceptibly. Lord Ashford looked up, hope and fear mingling in his gaze. Grayson, pouring coffee, paused for a fraction of a second, a tell Poirot noted with interest. "Hidden in plain sight?" Clara said, her laugh light but strained. "That's rather poetic, Monsieur Poirot. But surely a thief would take it far from here, not leave it lying about." Her tone was teasing, but her eyes avoided his, and Poirot saw the tension in her posture. "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone genial, "but a thief with a purpose tied to this house, to its secrets, might keep it close, to use its power. The letter within, it is a dangerous thing, no?" His eyes flicked to Lord Ashford, then back to Clara, and he saw her smile falter, her fingers tightening on her cup. Charles shifted, his voice sharp. "You're just guessing, Poirot. You don't know anything. His eyes darted to Clara, then away, and Poirot noted the fear in his posture, the way his shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. Poirot leaned back, satisfied. The seed was planted, and he sensed that Charles and Clara would act soon, perhaps to check the locket's hiding place. He excused himself from the table, beckoning Hastings to follow, and they retreated to the library, where the quiet allowed him to think. He opened his notebook and wrote, Charles, nervous, close to breaking. Clara, defensive, protecting their plan. Hint of locket's proximity has unsettled them. Must watch their movements. Hastings leaned against a shelf, his voice low. You rattled them, Poirot. But where do we even start looking? This place is massive. Poirot's lips twitched. We start with their habits, mon ami. Charles, he is restless, often in the study or the gardens. Clara, she is drawn to elegance, the drawing room, her own quarters, and the note, scented with lavender, suggests a connection to her belongings. We shall begin with her room discreetly, and then the study. They waited until the guests dispersed, then slipped upstairs, using a moment when Grayson was occupied, in the kitchen. Clara's room was at the end of a corridor, its door slightly ajar. Poirot pushed it open, his eyes scanning the space. A four-poster bed with silk drapes, a vanity cluttered with perfumes and jewelry, and a wardrobe filled with elegant dresses. The air was heavy with lavender, confirming his suspicion about the note. He moved to the vanity, his magnifying glass in hand, and examined a locked jewelry case, its key nowhere in sight. Curieux, he murmured, noting the faint scratches around the lock, suggesting frequent use. He tested the cabinet key found in the study, but it didn't fit. Not here, but close, he said, his eyes sweeping the room. He opened a drawer, finding a silk scarf with a faint metallic glint beneath it, a small key, identical to the one for the jewelry case. He pocketed it, intending to test it later, and continued his search, finding nothing else of note. Hastings, standing by the window, whispered, Poirot, someone's coming. They slipped behind a curtain, peering through a gap as Clara entered. Her movements hurried. She went straight to the vanity, opened the jewelry case with a key from her pocket, and rummaged briefly, her face relaxing as if confirming something was still there. She closed the case, locked it, and left, her steps quick. Poirot emerged, his eyes gleaming. The locket. It is in that case, or she believes it is. We must act carefully, Hastings. If we confront her now, she will deny it. We need proof. They left the room, careful to leave no trace, and made their way to the study, where the broken window was still boarded up. The room was as Poirot remembered. Dark wood paneling, a cluttered desk, and the glass-fronted cabinet with its damaged lock. He examined the desk, finding a hidden compartment beneath a false bottom, empty but bearing the same lavender scent. A temporary hiding place, perhaps, he said, adding to his notebook. Study. Possible initial hiding place. Clara's jewelry. Case. Likely current location. As they left the study, they encountered Lady Beatrice in the corridor, her face pale, her hands trembling. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low. I must speak with you. Alone. Hastings stepped away, muttering about the gardens, and Poirot followed her to a small sitting room, its walls lined with family portraits. Madame, Poirot said, his tone gentle. You are troubled. What do you wish to share? Her eyes, filled with tears, and her hands twisted together. It's Charles, monsieur. I know he's in trouble. Debts, terrible debts. I found letters in his room, from creditors, threatening him. I think he took the locket to pay them off. But he's not a bad boy, monsieur. He's just desperate. Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was sharp. Madame, your love, for your son it is profound. Did you help him perhaps by staging the break-in to protect him? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. No, I only wanted to protect him. I lied about the library, yes, because I was in the study looking for those letters. I heard the crash, but I didn't break the window, I swear it. Her words were rushed, and Poirot noted the sincerity in her gaze, the desperation of a mother. Nodded, his voice soothing. Merci, madame. Your candor, it is a step toward the truth. I shall do all I can for your son. She rose, her steps unsteady, and Poirot wrote, Lady Beatrice confirms Charles's debts, lied to Protahut,